BC revolves around football. You know, in the fall, that's what everybody's talking about. That's where you see a lot of BC students. That's where you see alumni. That's where you see the New England community coming together because it's BC football.
As a person who's very proud to be a BC guy, I love my school. I love this university. But when I look at this chapter, I had a hard time accepting that we did that. Lou Montgomery was not allowed to play in one of the most historic games that Boston College has ever been part of, the Cotton Bowl. And the only reason why we sat him down is because he was black. That's it. No other reason. I'm gonna make sure that everybody who I've talked to and wants to talk football, that they know about Lou. Because Lou actually was a great BC guy. And he should be remembered.
Of course, you know, everybody know about Jackie Robinson. But Lou Montgomery was the Jackie Robinson of Boston College. First black athlete, very talented.
In 1937, Lou Montgomery became the first black football player at Boston College. Montgomery, a Massachusetts All-Scholastic football player from Brockton High School, became part of the Team of Destiny.
I think Dad loved his college. He loved the students. He loved everything about the college and the atmosphere and all in his day.
He enjoyed going there, and the experience, you know, of going to college, being the first to go to college.
Through the first half of the 20th century into the 1960s, most universities in the United States, with or without religious affiliation, were predominantly white, and Boston College was no exception.
I entered Boston College in the fall of 1959. And at the time I entered, I was one of, I believe, 2 people of color in the entire freshman class. When I was at Boston College, there were no varsity athletes of color in any sport. Track, football, basketball, baseball, nothing. But I had heard of this guy, Lou Montgomery. I didn't know him personally, but I had heard the name. And from time to time, you would hear about this guy who had played at BC.
I was a student at Boston College in the mid-'70s. Never heard of Lou Montgomery in my whole undergraduate years here. I got to hear about Lou Montgomery later from alumni like Donald Garnett and some other folks who got here before I did. But Lou Montgomery, to hear his story is incredible.
In February 2015, in response to student interest about Lou Montgomery's story, Francisco Bernard wrote an article for one of the Boston College student newspapers.
I first learned about Lou in a class I'm taking, currently called Race Law and Resistance, taught by Juan Concepcion. I was shocked. I was honestly shocked because a member, not only of the football team, but of the BC community, wasn't being treated equally because of the color of his skin. That is, as a person of color, it's not good. It doesn't feel good.
So the young folks today, they're looking at the history of Boston College, evaluating their place at Boston College today and asking questions. Why haven't we made more progress?
Manny said that every time he walked around Conti in the back, in the locker rooms, there was never really any mention of Lou. He really only heard about Lou when he started asking around. And this is a black football player who wears 21, who's on the football team currently at this time, and he has no idea who the first black athlete is and what legacy he's wearing on him. So when he learned about the story, he was a little bit upset, obviously. And when I asked him, what could be done, one of the ideas he said, maybe make a statue.
When we look at history, we can't change it. We have to look at it for what it is. It'll either absolve us or it will indict us. And that's the way it is. And it's true to this day. That's why it's so important for us to look into the future with the hope that we will take the right actions.
Over the years, the efforts and persistence of alumni and students to recognize Lou's exceptional accomplishments as a member of the Team of Destiny sparked renewed interest in the legacy of Lou Montgomery. At the opening football game in September 2012, with members of the Montgomery family present, Lou Montgomery's jersey was retired. A first step toward acknowledgement of his valuable contributions to the team and to the university.
It was thought that perhaps his contribution should be recognized in a special way. Now, up on the southeast corner of Alumni Stadium, they've retired about a half a dozen jerseys. There are Boston College images of Boston College jerseys up on that wall with the names of some of the great players, great contributors that we've had. And it was decided that Lou Montgomery's jersey should be added to that group.
The late Lou Montgomery of the class of 1941 was the first African-American football player to wear Boston College's maroon and gold. He was an exciting and highly skilled running back and a major offensive contributor to the Eagles teams that won 19 of 20 regular season games in his junior and senior seasons and earned invitations to the 1940 Cotton Bowl and the 1941 Sugar Bowl. Tragically, because of the severe and unjust racial segregation customs of that era, Lou Montgomery was not allowed to participate in either of those postseason games or in regular season games against teams from the South. Rising above that unspeakable prejudice, Lou Montgomery never compromised his own high principles, his undaunted spirit, or his unwavering support of his teammates and fellow Boston College students. Today, Boston College honors Lou Montgomery by retiring his varsity football jersey. It will be permanently displayed on the southeast facade of Alumni Stadium, where it will be added to the commemorative jerseys of Boston College's top football legends. And now, we unveil the jersey of Lou Montgomery, a member of the Boston College Hall of Fame and a true champion in the history of Boston College athletics.
Halftime, we were on the field. The unveiling of his retired jersey was just beautiful. I know I was right there with everybody else, and I know my sister was just teary-eyed, just crying. Everything was just really great. The services were very, very nice. There's only been 10 individual men, period, that have ever had their jerseys retired at Boston College, and Daddy was the only black one.
I was in the stands there, and no one really knew anything about Lou Montgomery. So symbolism is fantastic, and I commend all the people who work to have that symbolism placed right at the epicenter of our university. We need to be reminded of that story, that particular story. There are others, but that particular story needs to form part of the narrative, a central part of it. So I commend that work. At the end of the day, as strong as these symbols may be, they will mean nothing at all if we don't continue the discussion and really go into the story and make sure that generations and alums and students, everyone that teaches here understands that when they hear the name Lou Montgomery, everybody understands the real story behind it.
With his exceptional speed and ability to play both offense and defense, Lou made significant contributions to the building of a championship team.
Lou was a multi-sport star at Brockton High School and one of the very few African-American athletes at Brockton High at the time. I think he said something to me like there was only 3 or 4 black students at the high school at the time. He was a top athlete, played baseball, played basketball, played football, succeeded at everything.
Lou Montgomery was an all-scholastic Boston Globe running back. He was on the small side, 5'6", 5'7", somewhere in there, 150, 160 pounds. But he was an elusive runner.
He had several offers. He was approached by Columbia. He was approached by Ohio State. He was approached by schools all over the country. Boston College offered him a partial scholarship, and actually the city of Brockton stepped up and held a number of testimonial dinners and fundraisers to fund the remainder of his scholarship at Boston College. And then he benefited from the fact that pretty much to a man, the all-scholastic team in Massachusetts that year all decided to go to college together and all decided to go to Boston College. He had this tremendous influx of talent coming from Eastern Massachusetts, all coming to Boston College all at the same time, including not only Lou Montgomery, but players like Charlie O'Rourke.
It's becoming a more well-known story. It's a very positive one. In the beginning, because Boston College brought its first African-American star athlete to the campus in the pre-war days, when this was not a common occurrence at most colleges in the North, certainly not in the South, but even in the North. And so here was the star of Brockton High School turning down a chance to go to UCLA, where he would have been a teammate of Jackie Robinson's and Kenny Washington's. You know, that would have happened. They would have overlapped for 2 years. Wow. Big opportunity, and instead he chose to remain at home.
In 1987, Lou Montgomery spoke to sports writer Glenn Stout about the devastating effects of the Jim Crow era on his football career.
Yeah, see, my guys had told me that they would intercede for me out here in UCLA or USC if I wanted to, but that time California was another whole. I was scared to go past the Mississippi. I was scared to go south because every time I went there, I damn near got annihilated, and I was just scared, you know, to go any far distance. So I just told them no. We go to BC. The guys made a pact, and it was an informal pact, but still, to me, it was a pact. You know? So we all went to the same school.
Are you glad that you went back? And in retrospect, are you glad that you went to BC?
Well, I'm glad I went to school.
Lou Montgomery may have been the first athlete at Boston College, but he wasn't the first African-American to attend the school. That was a man by the name of Casper Ferguson, who I knew well. Cappy Ferguson. He was in the class of 1937. And his experience at Boston College was very difficult. He was not accepted by the overwhelming majority of his classmates, and he was forced to be, not by choice, but by situation, to be put to the side. He was a chemistry major. I think he did well academically at Boston College, but the overall student experience was not a good one. He shared that with me because I knew him. He knew I was a Boston College grad, and we compared what it was like. For him, it was very difficult.
Lou Montgomery was a pioneer in Boston College football. He was a very key part of one of the greatest eras of Boston College football back in 39, 1940. Those were great teams that we had, and he was a great contributor to those teams.
In the late 1930s, there were just a handful of black athletes playing major college sports in the United States. I mean, you had Jackie Robinson and Kenny Washington out at UCLA, and a smattering of players elsewhere, but on hardly any team in the country, there were no more than one or two players of African American heritage playing major college sports in a major sport like football or basketball or something like that.
Were you aware when you went to Boston College that you'd be the first black football player at Boston College?
I wasn't aware when I went. I was aware when I arrived.
Right.
3 blacks in the class. I was the only football player.
Uh-huh.
And then after I got there, then I realized that I was the only black on the team. Well, I didn't know that there had not been any ahead of me, but I soon found out.
Well, the West Coast was a little bit farther ahead in terms of having African Americans on the team. The South, of course, there were none. The East Coast and the Midwest were not quite as progressive as the West, but there were still a smattering of schools that had African American players. The Big Ten always had some African American players. Harvard had African American players in the past. But, you know, Lou Montgomery was something new for Boston College.
With the departure of Coach Gil Doby, who recruited Lou, and the arrival of Coach Frank Leahy, Lou Montgomery and his teammates garnered national recognition. Lou recalled that transition.
He had been one of the winningest coaches in the nation at the time.
Uh-huh.
And they were definitely trying to get into big time at that time, and got there when just about the time Frank Leahy came. They had been signing on these bigger teams. Somehow they couldn't get the bigger teams in the East. They were the biggest team.
BC wanted to have football success as a claim to fame. Leahy immediately saw that this guy, Montgomery, could play. And in his junior year, Montgomery played running back. He started sometimes and didn't start other times, but he averaged just under 10 yards a carry, which is phenomenal. That might have led the country. But he was held out of certain games because he was not allowed to play in those games.
During segregation, the Gentlemen's Agreement undermined the principles of social justice, perpetuating racial inequality both on and off the field.
I believe it was an actual contractual agreement. I think it was in paper. That's the references that I see from that time period actually refer to it as being written into the contracts, that when you would agree to play a team from the South, it was in there that you could not play an African American player. And that's at the same token, when they would come to play you would not play an African American player.
The real damage was done when these teams came north and played BC on their own home field, which was then Fenway Park. And it turned out they were racially exclusionary contracts, and BC agreed to play the game rather than say, hey, he's our guy, you know, if he doesn't play, we don't play. You can go back to Florida, you can go back to Louisiana. That, I think, was the real harm, the real damage, the real humiliation.
The problem with this idea of Southern teams not wanting to have a black ball player on the team or in the opposition, given what the state of the law was in the South at the time, okay, that was the law. It was an unfortunate law, it was an unfair law, but it was the law. I see it a little bit differently when these teams, Georgetown, Auburn, Florida, came to Massachusetts to play. There was no law against that here. And the fact that our school went along with the so-called gentleman's agreement, I put quotes around that term, I think we could have stood taller on that point. We didn't. Boston College was trying to establish itself as a football power. I get that. I understand it. I appreciate it. There's probably money involved. I get that. I understand it. But I would like to hold our school and the Jesuits who led our school, even then, to a higher standard. And they failed to meet that standard.
So Lou lost playing time not only in those bowl games, he lost playing time in other games. So his whole career was truncated by this. And that's something that's really overlooked, because if you just look at the raw stats, it's easy to say, oh, well, he only ran for 300-400 yards. How good was he? Well, he was only able to play about a third or half the time.
So you have a situation where Boston College decided to go down the road. Unfortunately, on its way down that road, it came to a fork. It came into a fork, kind of makes me think of that poem by Robert Frost, right? The Road Less Traveled. You're looking at a situation where you just started going down this path. Now you can go to the left or you can go to the right. You know, the right is what everybody's doing. It's the easy way. Just sit Lou down. Don't let him play. That's the right way to do it. But then there's this other road. If you let him play, if you push and you fight for Lou, then that's the road less traveled.
The Montgomery family acknowledged that their father and grandfather endured painful moments due to the racist attitudes of other teams and the university's failure to act against such injustice. Still, for the most part, Lou Montgomery was accepted, especially by his teammates.
Well, he, being from the North and the people from the South, he realized there were two different, ideals, you know, certain things that he would do that just wasn't accepted. And his teammates, I think in that way, protected him.
I think he really, truly loved his colleagues, and they loved him, and they protected him as much as they could, knowing what the situation was.
This has been chronicled. You know, at times they basically said they did not want to take the field unless he was on the sidelines with them with an opportunity to play. And the forces that came to bear on them, including Lou basically saying, I don't want you guys, you know, being put in a position of trouble or getting in trouble or, you know, having this hurt you. So part of his magnanimity and part of his greatness as a teammate was that he appreciated their sentiments, but he knew the forces at work against them all and did not want those being brought to bear on his teammates and friends. I mean, a total class act.
Well, he loved playing, and he wasn't going to upset the team by upsetting the cart when he couldn't play. So that's why they liked him so much.
I then asked about Lou to my friend and museum trustee and Boston College immortal Chuck and Charlie O'Rourke. And it was interesting, when I brought Lou's name up to Charlie, Charlie was he was pensive and really sort of sad. And he revealed to me that he and a number of the players on the team were really broken up and very, very dismayed at how Lou was treated, and that it was really hurtful, and he sort of said, I wish we could have done more. That was pretty revealing. And so his first emotion was feeling sadness that, you know, they all worked and played together. They were a real team. They were a great team. But the greatness was diminished by the fact that, you know, this injustice was done, and they witnessed it.
As win followed win, Coach Leahy focused on the best ways to utilize his players for ever greater glory. What could have become an opportunity for racial equality never materialized. As the university chose to accept terms demanded by Southern universities steeped in segregationist tradition, forcing Lou Montgomery to the sidelines.
When these teams came up here, they stood ready to point out the racially exclusionary contracts that had been signed, and that BC would forfeit the money, the gate receipts of the game, if they refused, if they refused to play, or if they insisted on playing Lou Montgomery.
BC needed to schedule Southern schools because in order to make their program stronger and better, they needed tougher opponents. Well, it's interesting to note that the facts show that in 1940, the season that they were self-proclaimed national champions, although there are other schools that claimed it too, but when they were undefeated, their toughest opponents that season were Temple and Holy Cross. They beat Holy Cross 7-0, and believe they beat Temple by 13 points. So those are the closest games in their schedule, both East Coast schools. So that certainly, the argument that, we have to look elsewhere, we have to accede to the gentleman's agreement of these schools down south in order to further our own aims.
That was a deliberate strategy on the part of Frank Leahy and the Boston College Athletic Department. We thought that this was a way that we could improve our stature both as a football program and as a university. It was something that would get us a lot of attention, and it did. We certainly were in all the major media outlets of the day. Of course, the days before television, but we were on radio. Grantland Rice, the great sports writer, covered one of our games, called it the greatest game of college football ever played when we beat Georgetown in Fenway Park in 1940. But BC deliberately played that type of schedule and chose to do that to increase their visibility, if you will.
He thought that Boston College understood his situation. I'm sure there were times when he felt that they could have supported him in a better area, in a better way than what they actually did. I think he would have felt a lot more supported had they chose and decided that if he didn't play, they wouldn't play. I think he would have naturally felt more comfortable with that.
As the goal shifted to increasing visibility for a winning team, no one considered the price Lou had to pay.
At the time, Boston College wanted to be a big-time football school. Under Dobie, they'd had some success. Under Leahy, they started having a lot more success. It was very lucrative. It made Boston College stand out, and there was a lot of money behind that. And they were determined not to let anything stand in that way. And essentially, because of the money, they allowed money to override the morality of the issue.
In 1929, Georgia Tech was invited to play in the Rose Bowl against the University of California. California was not inclined to pull its lone black player in deference to Southern white sensitivities. As a result, Georgia Tech agreed to play the game on California's terms. 1916, Harvard University chose to cancel a dual track meet at the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland, because Navy officials refused to allow Harvard's star long jumper, an African American, to participate. So there's lots of places where schools stood their ground and said, he plays and we play. He doesn't play, we don't play. So BC would not have been the first to do this. There was precedent.
The irony of ironies in a lot of this, okay. In 1940, right in the midst of Lou's career at BC, the Harvard Athletic Department issues a statement saying they will harbor no change of policy in terms of their athletic programs based on race. Now, this was Harvard. This was the school who basically inspired the founding of Boston College because of the discriminatory admissions practices that they had for a number of years against Catholics, especially Irish Catholics.
He told me that, after he left Boston College is when he converted to Catholicism. And he said, then I started to study the Catholic Church and the history of Christianity. And the more he learned, he realized the degree to which principles had been crossed.
So, here you have the one institution across the river basically saying, we're going to do the right thing from here on in, right in the midst of a time when, while the fathers here were, certainly praying the rosary, they were looking at the balance sheet as well. And Frank Leahy had one foot out the door for all those years. He wanted bigger and better things, and his route to glory at Notre Dame meant Boston College was a way station, but it had to be a way station that would include, climbing the rungs of the ladder, no matter whose hands you stepped on in order to reach the pinnacle. And, the truth is a hard thing to accept.
He truly was victimized because if you look at the arc of his career at Boston College, he makes the starting lineup in 1939. He's playing, he's one of the stars of the team. Then that Florida game comes and he can't play. And then Boston College starts looking ahead and realizing they might be going to a bowl game and they might be facing the same situation where they have to play a team from the South, and his playing time starts to go down. And then in 1940, knowing this situation exists, his playing time is diminished from the start. He has a lesser role in 1940 than he did in 1939, although by any measure, he was one of the most talented backs on the team. But Frank Leahy, knowing that he might not have one of his most talented players for the most important games of the season, the bowl game at the end of the season, as a coach, he has to look for alternatives. So he stops playing Lou as much as he probably more than he wanted to because he had to look at other players. He had to find the guys who he would be able to play.
After demonstrating their strength as a winning team, the Eagles were invited to play a Southern team in Dallas, Texas. In this very close Cotton Bowl game, Clemson beat Boston College 6-3 to end the 1939 season.
There's a biography about Frank Leahy that discusses some of the circumstances around the Cotton Bowl and everything. And it says in there that after the Cotton Bowl, he told you that if they'd let us bring you along, we wouldn't have lost. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah? So he did say that to you.
He did say that to me.
Lou Montgomery told me directly that after the Clemson game, the Cotton Bowl, that Frank Leahy came up to him and said, "Lou, if we would have had you, we would have won." And if you look at that game, it's probably true. They shut down Charlie O'Rourke. Without Charlie O'Rourke being able to do what Charlie did, without anybody else taking the heat off of him, they could focus right on O'Rourke and shut down Boston College's offense.
Daddy loved football. He loved to play. He loved each and every one of his colleagues. He loved the game itself. and he would do anything, I think, to play the game. And he loved it so well that even when they told him that there was a possibility that he couldn't play because of the color of his skin, he loved the game so well and loved his team so well that he chose himself, okay, not to play.
But one of the saddest pictures I've ever seen, and it was included in the piece that Glenn did for Boston Magazine, is of Lou listening to the Cotton Bowl on the radio, wearing his BC jacket, away from his teammates, away from, everyone that he practiced with and, shared great moments with. He's this isolated, again, alone, a singular man listening to a game that he should have been a participant in, and that they, of course, lost. Well, I guess the victory would have been if they had rejected the invitation to go to the game, if the absolute condition was that Lou couldn't have played, because, there are victories and there are victories.
I think it's one of the most unfortunate parts of the history of Boston College. And remember, I love Boston College. I consider it a great institution, but that's one of its low points in my view. I think we should have taken a stronger stand, and if opponents would not allow one of the football players, merely because he was a person of color, not to come onto the field, we should not have played that game.
The media chose to deflect attention from the decision to bench Lou.
He played the good soldier. He allowed ghost-written letters to be written with his name, cheering his teammates on, telling them to give it his all.
I think that letter was, it came from me, but it didn't come in terms of a letter. It came in terms of an interview of what I would like to say to the public. I think the idea was that I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to bother writing letters to friends and people, because everybody was asking me the same question. So I think the idea was that if we got a letter published, then everybody would see it.
Answer all the questions.
Yeah, so we talked about things, and then the letter came from that talk. But it wasn't anything I sat down and wrote out myself. I don't think I would have done anything like that.
Lou had not been allowed to join his team for the Cotton Bowl. For the 1941 Sugar Bowl, he accompanied the team to New Orleans. However, he was excluded from practice and the game. Unable to be with his teammates, he stayed with Ralph Metcalfe, silver medalist at the 1936 Nazi Olympics, during which time Jesse Owens won the gold.
The Eagles Band is the spirit of Boston College, but we rely on fan participation to create and sustain our overwhelming home field advantage, particularly as we move into the fourth quarter.
Preserving the rights of the gentleman's agreement while denying Lou his rights as a gentleman, the Sugar Bowl victory over Tennessee for the Eagles became yet another loss for Lou and Justice.
This is the Sugar Bowl program, and
Was that 40?
this is 1941, January 1st, 1941. So he's a senior this year, and of course this is the game they win. They have the team picture. He's not there. The roster for the Sugar Bowl Classic, it goes from number 20 to 22. He's left out completely, as though he didn't exist. Like he's been Stalinized, is the way I would describe it.
Lou continued his career in sports and later in education and business. In his late 60s, he recounted his range of experiences after graduation in his final interview with Glenn Stout.
Took my kids that were in my math class, any male in my math class that got A or B dressed on my team on Saturday, sat on the bench, couldn't play, of course. But I took those 15 guys, and I'm very proud of the fact that we won everything we went up against.
You didn't lose a game,
We didn't lose a game. First year down there, I won the championship. Those kids, they were terrific. They got up there to Brockton High. They never played against white boys before. And there were about 4,000 or 5,000 people, and my guys were scared to go after the ball even. So I called timeout and went out there and said, "Hey, you guys, you're home. This is my place. You don't have to be afraid or anything. I know people are cheering you, not the team and all that, And then they started playing and they caught up and we damn near beat them. We lost by 9 points.
Yeah.
In the early history of Boston College football, amid the celebratory atmosphere of national champions, few questioned Lou's absence. Choosing to accept an agreement that offered fame while preserving prejudice. Before his death in 1993 at the age of 72, Lou Montgomery accomplished much in his life as an athlete, teacher, and businessman, devoted to his family. It is time to restore Lou Montgomery's legacy and acknowledge this most honorable athlete and human being who contributed and sacrificed everything for his love of the game and his team.
His daughter in particular spoke very highly of her father. In fact, she gave BC a gift by telling Boston College about her father, never complaining about Boston College. Just said that he played football, he was a student, and that's all that mattered. He gave back. He gave more than he received.
A scholarship, an academic or athletic scholarship, however it might be construed, I think would be a marvelous idea to carry on the legacy and the story of Lou Montgomery.
And I think that Daddy would love to know that there are some young men out there of our color with skills such as his, with intellect such as his, that could really truly benefit from having a scholarship fund in his honor.
Here's somebody who came to our school, was a great student, was a great athlete, but really didn't get to enjoy the full breadth of his potential.
Well, I think the responsibility for what happened to Lou Montgomery is one of those circles where everybody points at somebody else, Whereas I think in reality, no one stood up. And yes, you can say, well, it was society, it was the time, that's just the way things were. But I always look at it at any time in our history where there's been injustice. There have always been people and sometimes institutions that have taken a stand, that have done the right thing, regardless of the cost.
I think institutionally for Boston College, it would be great to really look at Lou's story and embrace it and understand that, you know, we did a great thing. We had, where other schools would not even consider it, we had a black starting player in our lineup. That was a fantastic moment. The moment we went wrong was when we started actually, you know, pretty much listening to the Southern demands in our home.
The way I view this story now is that by telling it truthfully and examining it carefully, there is a road to redemption for the college in terms of the wrongs that were done, that there's this golden, maybe even a platinum opportunity now to say, you know, let's just pause here and let's examine this. And this was wrong, especially for a Jesuit institution. And now is the chance to right that wrong so that what started out as a positive story can be an even more positive story in the end result 70 years later. How great could that be?